let's start our created project and let's see what's happening. So here is the training project calendar week 03, and I will simply click on start project here, and several things are happening. So first of all, the log viewer is starting, the console is starting, and also the question is starting that I should use my root password, which was never defined, and it's also asking me in German and not in English, but the console is in English, right? The reason is the password is always asked on a user interface, also if it's empty. So if I simply stay on that and I click OK, the user interface starts, and also the GEDI, and the GEDI starts also in German. But this is an English training, so I have to change that. So what I will do right now, I will look into the config file of my project. The config file can be opened from the third icon from the left inside the console, or also from the project administrator. If you click on the gear wheel, then you can also open it from here, or you open it from a third-party tool through the Windows Explorer. I don't care. Anyway, if you go through the console, then congratulations, you will be then an expert for WinSys UA. So go for it and take it. Here is the config file in the also named config folder. In the end, in the config folder, there are also some other files inside, like the TLS certificates, and also the setting from the managers will be there. I will show you a little bit later. So in this config file, we can see that we have two sections, the general section and the user interface section. So the general is always there. You will find the installation path of the version itself and the project path of the project itself. If there would be a sub-project included, then there will be a third line between there and that one here. Then we have the information of the version, the SQLite usage, and here are the languages. And you can see that the first language is German Austrian, and that is the reason that the system starts German, because this first setting here defines the default language. But I can change that. And please never ever change the order of this language settings here. That's forbidden. So if I want to load for all managers, general section means it affects all managers here in the console, then I will simply, instead of langs, I will use lang equals enus.utf8, because that defines the default language. So, and yes, use hash for comments in the config file. So please also make the same changes on your side. We have also here UI sections where a default font is used. So I will also write here, for example, active icon theme equals themes modern, and that is under quotes, but I will deactivate that and show you a little bit later. I will also do an auto log on for the system by directly writing in here the username and the password. Be carefully, all these entries are case sensitive and a wrong written entry can cause into problems. So best practice, if you deal also as a beginner with the config or the modification of the config, please take the help. So in here we have a reference table, which is more or less one of the most important chapters over here. And here we have a chapter for the WinCC configuration file, and here are the possible config entries for WinCC. And in here you will find, for example, the entry to realize the auto log on. So you see here user name, that's the entry where we define, okay, with username the root should be logged on automatically, and there is also password. Here we are, password, so that's lowercase. And here we take now password and with an empty string between the quotes. I will save that now. And let's see. Here is the user interface from before. I can also, you can see that all the managers are started here. So red if it's not started, green if it's started, yellow if it's starting, purple if it's overloading, and blue, yellow blinking if the manager crashed for some reason. Also here on the user interface you have start, stop and kill the manager, change properties of it, attach a debug flag, open the control debugger, or simply change the order of the manager inside this list. But that is only working correctly if the project is stopped. Anyway, the user interface always asks for a user if we have here this auto log on in here. So let's see, I'm starting the user interface with the option -mgedi, which is starting the graphical editor in user interface with the number 1. So this is the unique number of each manager. If I set up a second user interface, it will auto assign a higher number, and that will be 2, for example. You can also see that every manager has a unique number. For the database SQLite manager and the event manager, it's by default 0. For all the others, it's 1. Anyway, these 4 or 5 managers only exist one times in one project. You can set up again up to 256 control managers, drivers and user interfaces. And that's the best practice starting order for all the managers, which means if we later do some control managers inside, we will do them together here. All the drivers will be clustered here, and in the end the user interfaces will be stored on here. So we will change the order. To the GEDI itself, you can see this is the new design, very improved with the Siemens corporate colors. If you don't like this design, you can also simply take this here, which is called Themes Modern, will be then the new style, or let's say the new and modern one. And we can also, instead of that, take the same entry and if we do simply that here, then it's the old and classic one. And I will now show you that. So I save that, I restart the user interface, and then you can see that's the old style. So anyway, up to you. That's only a visualization thing. I like the new one, so I will simply deactivate that here. I don't really have to activate that because that is a default setting here, which means if I now start that, oh, then it's the old one because I did not click on save here. So let's do it again. And here we are with the new style. You can also see that these changes had to be done on the user interface section, which means the user interface will look into this config file on startup as all the other managers do at startup, and the user interface will look into the general section and look here and read everything, because general is for every kind of manager. And then the user interface will look in this user interface section. So this is the section only for user interfaces. And that's why if we look in here, in the possible config entries in WinCCA, we have here different sections. The control section, for example, will only be interesting for control managers. And we can also be a little bit more detailed, which means if I write here a control section, then every entry here is for all control managers, right? And if I do that here, then only for control manager number 1. And what is control manager number 1? It's more or less this control manager here, right? But if you do here a more detailed one, control manager 1, then I would also do here in addition minus num1. So I will fix the number here that I go sure that this control manager always get the manager number 1. So if we have starting problems, to go sure this one is 1 and that one are the rules for these managers, right? So just for information, that can also be done and highly recommend. If you fix the number here, fix the number in the console. Anyway, I will make comments here because that is not needed and was simply for explanation. Everything here is stored in a config file. Everything in here is stored in the so-called procs file. So if we take a look on the project, where is it? Last modified, basic trainer 3. So this is the folder structure of the project. And here in the config folder, you have the config file and the procs file. We can also open that with Notepad++, both. And we can see here that's the config file and that's the procs file. So everything can also change here, and then reopen the panels, and you will see the settings are taken also from here. Sometimes you need you have more or less that are starting options, right? And also that here are starting options. So in the config file, but that's globally for all. That's now for all user interfaces, right? These entries here, and in the prox file, this entry here is only for user interface number 1, right? Because that's here. So that's for a specific manager, and in the console, in the config file is for all managers. But you can always do it different, like I did it here, right? So you can also say, I want to have a general or a specific section only for control manager number 1 or user interface number 1, 2, or whatever. Yeah? So you have more or less 2 places for options, which can be redundant. Some of them are only possible in the config file. Some of them are only possible as a parameter, right? But in the end, it's based on the same idea, right? If we take a look here on the parameters, let's see if I got it here. By the way, that are the table for the dollar parameters, right? But I think, let's see, manager options. You have here the manager options, and here you will find also parameters, right? So all the parameters are documented, which can be taken. Like debug flags, we will also play with that, or for a specific manager like a UI, then you have specific parameters like centered, console, and so on. As I said, icon bar, should the icon bar be displayed, should the title bar be displayed, should the menu bar be displayed? So the first thing, if you are looking for parameters, go on here and look if there is a parameter for your usage. If it will not be there, then it will be here in the config file. I give you an example. So you have the possibility to skip the menu bar and the icon bar and all that stuff. And if I go here on the UI, here we are, UI, and then you will find here, for example, vision screen mode, where you have then the same but with other syntax, right? So you write then please no menu, no title bar, and so on. And you can also mix that, right? So the parameter box will always be override the config file, okay? Which means also, and now I will spoiler a little bit, you have seen here that I have written, if you do that here with a remote user interface project, you will have data and event addressed in the config file. That is also possible in a user interface. So for example, I can do here a user interface, a new manager, and I can write here -event and -data hostname. Right? Let's assume hostname is a running project which is reachable in my network, okay? Then that here would open a remote user interface to this server project, right? And the license for this user interface is also taken from this server project, right? So I can do a user interface in a running project which is executed in this console, but had nothing to do with with this project over here, right? So in theory, that is maybe senseless, right? But to get an idea that the hostname here is overwriting the settings from the config, it will technically work, before we start our user interface, let's also look in here what we have. So the project is running at this stage. You can close the console. You can close the project administrator, but you will see that you have the WinCCOA processes running here in the task manager, wherever it is shown. Also the code meter is running. Where is it exactly? So here are the processes, right? Always starting with WCC. So what happens if you simply close the window? Nothing. You have simply to reopen it to see that that is running, and also here reopen it over here, and then also the log viewer is starting. So anyway, you can also start the administrator from here, or you start the console from here. Okay, then you can also lock the project, so you see that the managers are then locked and all the icons here, and you can unlock the console. If we would have set up the password on project creation, on this process, on the unlocking process, this user and password will be asked from the system, right? But in this training situation we simply skip that. Here is the way to the config file. Here you can also switch the languages of the panel, and here you also see the license information. So that are more or less the same icons over here. Here you can stop the project and start the project in addition, and also open the log viewer. By the way, you have seen the log viewer, so I can close it and reopen it, but that was the one from the beginning on. So first of all, if we look into the log viewer, we can see the security issue, username and password found in the config file. That's true, it's a security issue, comfortable for development and training, but never do it in a real customer installation. Then in the log viewer we can filter here different severity levels, so only information, warning, severe error and fatal. If the log viewer is posting a lot, you can also freeze it here by the pause icon. You can also, if you are somewhere in between, jump to the end or simply clear the view. If you clear the view, it does not mean that everything is deleted, it's simply the view is cleared. Because if we look inside the training folder, there is a subfolder called log, and in the log you will see then the PVSS2 log, which will then hold everything which was before in the log viewer. The file itself grows to a specific amount, I think it's 5 or 10 megabytes configured. Then there will be a file switch, so the system will then create a backup file and the new initial file is empty. If the new initial file is reaches 10 megabytes, then the copy of it will go into the backup file and the backup file is deleted. The amount of backup files and also the amount of the maximum size of the log files can be configured and changed by config entries. You can also see in addition that every manager has a specific script, script log, which is at this stage most of the time empty. The reason for that is if you perform, for example, a debug flag. So let's do that for demonstration. So the event manager, I will take that here. I will activate the debug flag, and you can see there are some predefined ones, debug flags and reporting flags. The main difference between debug flags and report is a report is performed one time, and a debug statement does the whatever it should do always, right? For example, receive to, send to is the receive level and the send level. So that's huge amount of data. And if I activate that, everything is posted inside the log file, which going through the event manager. And that's all the time till I will do the following. Debug none, for example, then it stops. If I do a report all, for example, that's a one shot. And now I think I closed the log viewer. So let's do it again here. I do only a report all, and then I get a report about the event manager with its characteristics, right? And if I look now here on the file, then we will have here now the same data in a separated log file, right? So debug and report outputs are then in the specific log file. All other things are in the PVSS2 log. Why PVSS2? So that is the old name before Siemens rebranded PVSS to WinCCOA. More or less an Easter egg for you. Okay. So here are all managers. We can also stop the manager or kill it. We have also here the added manager properties. For example, if I look at the properties in here, I find -mgd, right? And then we have here the start mode and the restart with the restart counter. Which means by default, the user interface number one is configured in that way that it will start once, which means it starts on project startup, but if I close it, it stops. There is also manual available, which means if it's on manual, it will not automatically start, and it has to really start it and stop manually. Or I will go to always, right? So I will do that here on always. If I close it, it will simply restart, right? But only 3 times in 1 minute. And that's related to this restart. So if you have more restarts in 1 minute, then the manager stops. That's a good feature, because if you have a buggy script executed in a control manager, it will only restart 3 times in 1 minute, and then it stays stopped because it's always crashing, right? So anyway, a user interface with once is okay. So everything is done manually here, and here we are. To sum that up, let's go also through the slides over here, but a little bit more accelerated. So what we did, we created a project, a legacy standard one. We took into account that spaces and special characters are a bad idea. Then we did not a root password and not password protected, but at least we did 2 languages. After project creation, we did not really look inside, but we can see on the right side the installation of WinCCOA, and on the left side we can see the project, and if we compare the file structure, you will see that all folders in the project are also available in the installation itself, which has the message inside that your project is more or less only an extension of WinCC OA, right? Okay, on starting project, the log viewer starts, also the console opens, and here also documented to open the config or the first icons, what would do the process monitor, so our watchdog. Also here the starting colors with running, start, and not running yet, or stopped, and all together in here.